A bull was suffering from broken bones after a terrible fall, until a compassionate boy took the animal's pain upon himself. What happens next will leave you speechless. Rainwater dripped from the edge of the barn roof in steady rivulets, pattering against the mud below as the heavy smell of damp straw clung to the air. Elias Trent was halfway through brushing Bramble's thick, dark coat when a sharp metallic crash split the air like a gunshot. Before he could even turn his head, a voice cut through the sound. "Elias, watch out!" Jonah Pike's warning came from the yard, his arms flailing in urgent waves. But the shout came too late. The bull's muscles bunched under Elias's hand, a sudden surge of panic rippling through the animal's frame. Bramble's eyes went wide, whites flashing as the noise of the collapsing grain chute echoed through the rafters. The animal jerked sideways with surprising speed, his hooves skidding on the slick floorboards. Elias's brush clattered to the ground as the great weight of the bull knocked into the side gate. The hinges groaned and snapped. Before Elias could move, the gate gave way, and Bramble's massive body lurched through the opening. His front hooves scrabbled for purchase on the muddy slope beyond, but the earth was too slick from the morning rain. Bramble's hind legs slid forward, his whole bulk tilting unnaturally. Elias's heart clenched as he saw the inevitable, Bramble's legs folding awkwardly beneath him as he tumbled into the shallow ravine behind the barn. The thud of impact was deep and wrong, the kind of sound that lodged in Elias's bones. He didn't think, he just ran. His boots sank in the sodden ground, mud sucking at each step as he scrambled down the embankment. Bramble lay on his side, chest heaving, legs trembling with spasms of pain. His breath came out in harsh snorts, steam rising from his nostrils into the cold air. "Elias, stay back!" The voice belonged to Owen Trent, his uncle, who had sprinted from the far side of the yard. Owen's broad frame was hunched as he half slid down the bank, his jaw set tight as his eyes scanned the bull's body. The way Bramble's foreleg bent was wrong, unnatural. Elias froze for a moment, torn between obedience and the fierce pull in his chest. Bramble was more than just an animal to him. He'd raised the bull from a calf, been the one to soothe him during storms, to coax him to eat after sickness. The thought of him lying there in agony made Elias's breath quicken. "We need the vet," Owen muttered, crouching near the bull's shoulder, his tone clipped. "Jonah, get to the phone, now." Jonah didn't waste a second, sprinting toward the house. Elias edged closer, ignoring the sting of rain against his cheeks. Bramble's massive head shifted toward him, eyes locking onto his in a way that felt almost human. Elias could hear the wet squelch of mud beneath his boots, the rustle of Bramble's shallow breathing. He didn't think about what he was doing. He just knelt, placing a hand gently against the bull's broad forehead. "Bramble," Elias whispered, the name trembling on his lips. For a brief instant, the bull's breathing slowed, the panic in his eyes softening. But then Elias felt it, something he couldn't explain. A deep, bone-aching throb began to crawl from beneath his palm, spreading up his arm and flooding into his chest and down into his legs. It was pain, but not his own, an alien agony that made his muscles seize and his breath catch. His first instinct was to pull back, but his hand wouldn't move. It was as if something in Bramble had hooked into him, anchoring him in place. The world around him seemed to narrow, the rain muffling into a distant hiss. His vision swam, edges blurring, the bull's dark eyes filling his entire focus. Somewhere above the pounding in his head, he heard Owen's sharp bark. "Elias! Back away! Now!" A jolt through his arm made Elias gasp. The throbbing in his legs intensified, sharp enough to twist his face into a grimace. Then a hand gripped his shoulder hard, yanking him backward. The connection broke, and the pain began to ebb from his limbs, though not entirely. Elias stumbled in the mud, his boots sliding as he landed hard on one knee. Owen's eyes flicked between the boy and the bull. Bramble, impossibly, was moving, lifting his head, shifting his injured foreleg as though the pain had lessened. The leg was still swollen, but straighter than before, the tremors in his muscles easing. "Elias, what happened?" Owen asked, his voice tight with both confusion and concern. Elias opened his mouth but found no words. His breathing came in shallow bursts, and he became aware of a fierce ache pulsing in his own leg. He pressed his palm against it, wincing as a wave of pain lanced through his thigh, almost identical to what he imagined Bramble must have felt moments ago. Owen frowned, misreading the gesture. "You tripped in the mud when I pulled you back. Go inside. Jonah will be back with news on the vet soon." Elias nodded faintly, but he didn't move right away. His eyes lingered on Bramble, who was watching him with quiet intensity. The rain beat harder now, running in streams down Elias's face, but he barely noticed. Jonah returned, slowing as he reached the edge of the ravine. His gaze darted from the bull to Elias, his brow furrowing. There was something in Jonah's look, something sharper than concern. He had seen the way Elias had gone pale, the way his body had tensed just before Bramble's breathing steadied. Elias turned away, not ready to explain what he himself didn't understand. None of them understood what had just happened, least of all Elias. Bramble stood in the paddock, his head lowered, but his stance steadier than it had been the day before. The early morning light caught the glisten of dew on his coat, but it wasn't the bull's recovery that made the neighbors talk. It was Elias. The boy was limping, dragging his left leg as if every step jarred something deep inside. The first to notice had been Mr. Carrick from the next farm over. He leaned on the fence, his weathered face creased in curiosity. "Strange thing," he said to Owen, who was adjusting the latch on the paddock gate. "Bramble looks better today than he should, but your boy, he's walking like the bull used to." Owen chuckled dryly, brushing off the comment. "Coincidence. Elias must have twisted his leg yesterday in the mud." But Jonah Pike, leaning on a pitchfork a few yards away, didn't laugh. He'd been there. He'd seen the way Elias had gone pale, the way he'd clutched his leg right after touching Bramble. And now, as Elias knelt by the water trough to refill it, Jonah noticed how the boy shifted awkwardly, as though his own bones carried the weight of something that didn't belong to him. By mid-morning, the vet arrived. Dr. Farron was a tall, spare man with a habit of narrowing his eyes whenever something didn't make sense. He circled Bramble slowly, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. He murmured, running a hand over the bull's injured leg. "The swelling's gone down faster than expected. Bone feels, well, not normal, but healing at a rate I wouldn't have thought possible." He straightened and gave Owen a questioning look. "You didn't give him anything I don't know about?" Owen shook his head. "Number. We just kept him calm and let him rest." Dr. Farron's gaze lingered on Bramble a moment longer before moving on. "It's strange, but I won't complain about progress. Just keep him from straining it again." Elias stood off to the side, leaning on the fence rail. Every time Bramble shifted his weight, a flicker of discomfort crossed his face, as if the movement echoed through his own muscles. Jonah, watching him, frowned. The truth came into sharper focus that afternoon. Elias was carrying a bucket of grain toward the paddock when Bramble tried to rise from a lying position. The bull strained, his front leg steady but his shoulder catching awkwardly. Elias froze mid-step, the bucket's handle slipping from his grasp as he let out a sharp breath. His hand shot to his own shoulder, fingers digging into the muscle. The bucket hit the ground with a dull thud, scattering grain into the mud. Jonah was on him in seconds. "Elias," he said quietly but firmly, his eyes locked on the boy's pale face. "What's going on with you?" Elias tried to straighten, but the tension in his frame betrayed him. "Nothing. Just pulled something." "Don't lie to me," Jonah pressed, his voice low. "I've seen you wince every time Bramble moves wrong. That's not normal. What happened yesterday? When you touched him?" Elias shook his head quickly. "I don't know. He cut himself off, glancing toward the farmhouse where Owen was hauling supplies inside. Jonah stepped closer, lowering his voice even further. "You can trust me. Did you take his pain somehow? Is that it?" Owen gave a sharp whistle, and Bramble trotted forward at a steady pace, his hooves striking the frozen ground with a dull rhythm. The officials watched closely, marking notes. For a moment, everything seemed to be going smoothly, until Bramble's front hoof found a hidden rut in the soil. The bull stumbled, catching himself quickly, but not before a sharp jolt passed through his frame. Elias flinched like he'd been struck. A soft cry escaped his lips, and his hand shot down to grip his knee. His knuckles went white against the denim. Jonah saw it, saw the flicker of pain in the boy's eyes at the same moment Bramble straightened and resumed walking almost without a hitch. The officials, oblivious to the link, murmured to each other about the bull's resilience. "Good recovery there," Cor remarked, scribbling on his form. Jonah clenched his jaw, his hands tightening around the fence rail. He didn't like this, not one bit. The inspection might have ended without further incident, but the weather had other plans. A sudden gust of wind barreled down from the ridge, slamming the barn door shut with a deep, echoing bang. Bramble, startled, reared his head and sidestepped hard into the gatepost. The thud of impact was solid, the kind that made Jonah wince on instinct. Elias's reaction was worse. His chest seized, his breath catching mid-inhale as if the air had been knocked from him. His knees buckled, and he lurched forward, barely managing to catch the fence rail before hitting the ground. His face had gone ashen, lips pressed into a tight line against the pain radiating through him. Jonah moved toward him at once, but Elias waved him off, forcing a strained smile. "I'm fine," he murmured, though his voice trembled under the effort. The officials, satisfied with Bramble's display of steadiness, made their way back toward the lane. Owen walked them out, nodding and exchanging clipped farewells. Jonah stayed behind, his gaze never leaving Elias until the sound of the official's boots faded into the wind. When Owen returned, Jonah was already steering Elias toward the barn, his hand gripping the boy's shoulder with a firmness that brooked no refusal. Inside, the scent of hay and old timber wrapped around them. Jonah shut the door behind them, the muffled quiet closing in. "Enough," Jonah said, turning Elias to face him. "You've been doing this since the ravine, haven't you? Taking Bramble's pain." Elias's eyes darted to the floor. His breath came unevenly. I didn't mean to, not at first." "But you can," Jonah pressed. "You take it into yourself, and it stays until he's healed. That's why you're walking like this." Elias hesitated, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "It's not just his leg. When he hurt his shoulder today, I felt it too. It doesn't stop hurting, not really, until he's better." Jonah took a step back, his face tightening with disbelief. "Do you understand what that means? If the injury's too much, it could cripple you, or worse." The barn door creaked open again. Owen stepped in, catching the tail end of Jonah's words. "What's this about crippling?" His tone carried both irritation and suspicion. Jonah didn't look away from Elias. "Tell him," he said. Elias's voice was barely above a whisper. "When I touch Bramble, I can take his pain, his injuries, but they become mine." Owen's brow furrowed, his expression caught between confusion and disbelief. "That's nonsense." "It's not," Jonah cut in, his voice firm. "Let him prove it." Owen crossed his arms. "All right, prove it." Elias glanced toward Bramble's stall. The bull was lying down, his leg still slightly swollen from the stumble earlier. The boy stepped forward, his fingers trembling as he reached out to lay his palm against the bull's side. The effect was almost immediate. The taut muscle beneath his hand relaxed. The swelling in Bramble's leg eased, the skin losing its angry heat. But at the same moment, Elias swayed, his other hand clutching his thigh as if it had been struck with a hammer. A low sound escaped him, half gasp, half groan. Owen's eyes widened. He stepped forward, catching Elias before he could fall. Bramble gave a low, rumbling breath, then shifted more comfortably in the straw, his pain already dulled. Elias's face was pale, his breaths sharp and shallow. The truth stood between them, undeniable and heavy. Owen looked from the boy to the bull, then to Jonah. No one spoke for several long seconds, the silence broken only by the soft sounds of Bramble chewing. Finally, Owen exhaled, his jaw tight. He didn't say it aloud, but Jonah could see the calculation forming in his mind. The championship was only days away, and the decision that lay before them was as dangerous as it was tempting. Still, with the championship only days away, Owen began to weigh an impossible decision. The morning air bit through coats and gloves, the kind of cold that sank into bone and refused to leave. The championship grounds were already alive with sound, hoofbeats on packed dirt, the barked orders of handlers, the low rumble of cattle in the holding pens. Bramble stood in his own pen, his black coat brushed to a deep, healthy sheen, steam rising faintly from his nostrils as he exhaled. From a distance, the bull looked ready, more than ready, but Jonah's eyes kept drifting to Elias. The boy leaned heavily on a crutch, his weight awkwardly shifted to his good leg. The pale tone of his skin made the dark hollows under his eyes seem even deeper. Jonah stepped up beside him, lowering his voice so only he could hear. "You don't have to do this today," Jonah said, his breath forming quick clouds in the icy air. "Whatever Owen's got in his head about you helping Bramble again, it's not worth what it's doing to you." Elias's gaze stayed fixed on the bull. "If Bramble's hurt, he won't win. And if he doesn't win—" His voice trailed off, but Jonah didn't need him to finish. They both knew what was at stake, the farm, the debts, everything. Owen was on the other side of the pen, checking Bramble's halter, pretending not to listen. But Jonah saw the way his uncle's jaw tightened, the way his eyes kept flicking toward Elias without saying a word. The unspoken message was clear. The prize money was the only thing that could save the farm from foreclosure, and if that meant the boy taking the pain again, so be it. The morning wore on, competitors taking their turns in the ring. When Bramble's warm-up came, Jonah followed Owen and Elias to the practice area. The ground there was churned and uneven from earlier runs, and Bramble's hooves kicked up clods of earth with each step. For a few minutes his movements were clean, his strides measured. Then, on a sharp turn, his back muscles bunched awkwardly, and Jonah saw the subtle hitch in his gait. "That's not good," Jonah murmured, watching Bramble toss his head as if trying to shake something off. Elias noticed too. The bull's breathing had gone heavier, more labored. And though Owen said nothing, his stare at Elias was long and unblinking, like a silent order. Jonah stepped between them. "Don't. You heard what I said. You push yourself any further and—" Elias's grip on the crutch tightened, his knuckles whitening. He looked past Jonah at Bramble, who shifted restlessly, his flanks rising and falling in uneven rhythm. "He won't make it through like this," the boy whispered, almost to himself. "Elias," Jonah began, but it was too late. The boy limped forward, each step slow and deliberate, until he reached Bramble's side. He lifted a trembling hand and laid it against the bull's shoulder. The effect was instant and brutal. Elias's eyes squeezed shut, his mouth opening in a sharp gasp as the pain rushed into him like fire, flooding every nerve. His knees buckled, and he clung to Bramble's coarse hair to keep from falling. The bull's breathing steadied almost immediately, his posture straightening, the hitch in his gait fading as if it had never been there. Jonah took a half step forward, torn between yanking the boy away and letting him finish. By the time he moved, Elias had already pulled his hand back, swaying on his feet. Bramble walked into the arena with the ease of an uninjured champion, his movements smooth, his strength undeniable. The crowd erupted in cheers, the sound rolling like waves over the stands. Jonah could barely hear the announcer praising the bull's grace and resilience. His focus was on the shadow at the edge of the ring, Elias, sinking to his knees. Jonah sprinted to him, catching the boy just as he tipped sideways. "Stay with me," Jonah said urgently, lowering him onto the cold earth. Elias's breaths were shallow, his lips pale. Inside the ring, Bramble was earning top marks, his performance nearly flawless. The roar of the crowd was a cruel contrast to the rasp of Elias's breathing. Jonah barely glanced up when the final score was called and the bull was declared the champion. Owen appeared a moment later, clutching a thick envelope in one hand. His smile faltered when Jonah shoved it into his chest. "Take your winnings," Jonah said, his voice like steel. "Now look at him." Owen's eyes dropped to Elias, and the pride in his face dimmed. For a moment he seemed about to speak, but no words came. Jonah shook his head and turned back to supporting the boy, guiding him carefully away from the arena and toward the truck. Night fell quickly after the championship, the cold deepening until frost began to creep across the barn roof. Inside the farmhouse, laughter and clinking glasses filled the kitchen. Men from neighboring farms had come to celebrate, their voices loud with relief that the farm had been saved. But Owen wasn't in the kitchen. He sat beside Elias's bed, the envelope of prize money unopened on the nightstand. The boy lay still, his face slack in the soft lamplight, though his breathing had steadied. From the barn beyond the window came the faint, steady sound of Bramble's breaths, deep and calm. Elias stirred, his eyes opening just enough to find Owen's face. "It was worth it," he murmured, his voice thin but certain. In the doorway, Jonah stood with his arms crossed. His gaze lingered on Elias, but it was the flicker in the boy's eyes, a brief, unguarded flash of fear, that made his stomach turn. Jonah understood then, as clearly as if the boy had said it aloud. The farm had been saved, yes, but the cost had only begun to show itself. Elias closed his eyes again, and in the silence that followed, Jonah's mind held on to that fear, knowing it would come back. Because the truth was, the next time Bramble fell, there might not be enough of Elias left to take the pain away. The farm had been saved, but the cost had only begun to reveal itself. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores powerful themes of empathy, sacrifice, and the profound, almost mystical connection that can form between a human and an animal. This narrative aims to highlight the extraordinary power of compassion and the length some will go to heal another's pain.